So that is my signal to begin today's Tempo Talk session. So welcome, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jen Dirks, President and CEO of Tempo. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation. It's being dubbed the benefits cliff issue and discussion. So we will be joined by our panelists, Graham Anderson and Chris Hilmer, and our moderator, Lori Richards. So thank you all. This will be an important discussion. We hope that you leave today with not only being educated on this issue, but also well-informed and what it means to us to continue to have this conversation beyond just today's webinar. So thank you again. For those of you who are attending our Tempo Talks for the first time, welcome. Welcome to all of our Tempo members, our emerging women leaders. I know I was watching as people were entering today's webinar. We have a lot of guests as well. Today's session is also a partnership with the Hone Group. So welcome to all of our fellow Honies that have joined us for today's session. This is really an important discussion. In our Tempo Talk sessions, we started during the pandemic. It was our response to keep our members informed when we weren't meeting in person and keeping the programming high caliber for all of our members. We will continue those sessions, second Fridays in the following months that you see on your screen over the noon hour. And the unique aspect of these Tempo Talks is we are able to showcase the Tempo members' expertise and continue to leverage the incredible network that we have of different industries and expertise. And so we are joined today by Lori Richards and Chris Hilmer, who are both Tempo members. It's a content from a variety of industries, but just really thoughtful discussions. Because this is a webinar, all of our attendees are muted and your cameras have been disabled, but that does not mean we don't want to hear from you. We want this to be an interactive session. So please use the chat function. I know you all are familiar with Zoom or the Q&A. We will continue to monitor both during today's session so that we have a really robust dialogue. That's the Tempo Talks. These Tempo Talks would not be possible without the wonderful support of Associated Bank. I see that Camille Parham from Associated Bank as project manager has joined us. So Camille, please share a few words.
All right. Good. All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Camille Parham, project manager here at Associated Bank and a member of Emerging Women Leaders. Associated Bank is proud to support today's Tempo Talk, the Benefits Cliff, and Tempo as an organization. Associated Bank is known for its strong relationships with the customers and communities we serve. We're proud to have approximately 4,200 employees and more than 200 banking locations, serving more than 100 communities throughout Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, and loan production offices in several other states. Associated Bank seeks to create an environment with our colleagues' various backgrounds, ideas, points of view that enable us to produce better outcomes for our stakeholders. We celebrate differences among us and recognize that diverse perspectives come from many sources. As a part of our effort, we strive to build a culture where all voices are heard and valued, and historically underrepresented group perspectives are amplified. That demands mindful attention, intention, and clear accountability from all levels of the organization. Our DE&I efforts are strengthened by our company's DE&I Council and several colleague resource groups within Associated Bank, and that includes our 10+ year Women's Colleague Resource Group. This particular group's collective efforts continue to signify impacts on our workforce, workplace, and marketplace efforts. One highlight of these efforts is our commitment to increase representation of women within our leadership. We have a goal of striving for 35% of our senior vice president and above positions held by women leaders by 2025. And I am proud to report that right now we're at a 32%. Associated Bank is a proud sponsor, and we're proud to be a part of Tempo Talks and all of the impactful work that Tempo Milwaukee is doing. I hope you all enjoy today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille, and thank you, Associated Bank, for your generous sponsorship of our Tempo Talks. So thank you again. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to and introduce today's moderator, Lori Richards. Lori is CEO of Miller Communications. She has spent more than 20 years and being involved in public relations, as well as been instrumental in leading projects that have real and tangible impact in our Milwaukee community and beyond. And that is certainly around today's discussion with the benefits cliff. I know this has been a passion project of Lori's as well. Lori is a past chair of our Temple Milwaukee board. She is currently serving as our chair of our membership committee. I am honored to call her a friend as well. So I will introduce and turn it over to you, Lori. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. It's really an honor to be here as well, both with our Tempo members as well as members of HONE. So thank you everybody for tuning in and joining us for a discussion today about the benefits cliff. So as you all probably know from your day-to-day work, the areas of workforce development, talent, and staffing present some of the biggest challenges facing not only our state, but our individual businesses today. And there are no easy answers or solutions to this very complex issue. But today we're here to discuss one proposal that's making its way through the state legislative process that's designed to really start making an impact. Now, this is not your average legislative briefing, so we're not going to get too wonky today, maybe a little bit, but not too much. But because what is really, really unique about our discussion today is that it also demonstrates how we as citizens can drive change legislatively when we identify an area that we can help improve. So we'll dig into that a little bit more as we talk to our panelists today, Graham Anderson and Christine Hilmer. So first, a couple of quick introductions. Graham Anderson, who you see on your screen, is here with us today to talk about his efforts to solve the benefits cliff. He's really been the driving force behind this effort. Graham is a almost 20-year resident of Milwaukee, and in addition to his day job, which you see at Milwaukee Tool, he's a passionate advocate for economic and workforce development issues across the state. When you have a chance, if you ever are in a social setting with Graham, ask him about his work in Africa when he helped start Africa's first fair trade certified mass production garment facility in Ghana. Fascinating. And I think not only that experience, but his work with the Young American Leaders Program at Harvard Business School and applying it here to Milwaukee, his work on the GMC's Milwaukee United Economic Task Force, and on the board of the GPS Education Foundation really demonstrate his commitment to this community. And again, his efforts to go beyond just his day job to drive change. So welcome to Graham. As part of our discussion, Graham will be explaining benefits cliff, and we'll also have the ability to talk to Christine Hilmer. So Christine, again, as you see, is the president and CEO of the Wisconsin Restaurant Association. I'm really excited to talk to Chris today and integrate her into this conversation because as an association leader in Wisconsin, Chris knows directly how this affects her members. So as I mentioned, Chris is the president and CEO of the Wisconsin Restaurant Association, as well as its affiliated education foundation. So she represents about 1,500 restaurants in about 7,000 locations across the state. So in addition to work to support all of those restaurants through the pandemic, which we know has been a wild ride over the past couple of years, she's here today representing how they're looking at issues like talent, workforce development, and the benefits cliff as things that they can help solve for their members as well. So thank you to Graham and Christine. Before we dive in, I think it's probably most helpful to turn it over to you, Graham, to give us a quick overview of what is the benefits cliff and what are you proposing to help solve this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lori, for the generous intro. So I prepared some slides. As Lori said, really this work began about 4 years ago through the Milwaukee United Economic and Workforce Development Committee and Task Force through the Greater Milwaukee Committee. Over time, really what we looked at, and I'll give some quick context before I jump in, really we were looking at pathways for sustainable employment across the state. We were looking at that and saying, where within the system are there opportunities where there are barriers in place for individuals that are looking to improve their outcomes, the outcomes of their families? And then where are there opportunities within that system for us to address these issues? One of them that became very clear to us quickly is there is a phenomenon, which I'll get into in a moment, called the benefits cliff, where really it's well-intended legislation that through the way, or well-intended programs and policies, that through the way that they're structured, individuals are faced with a choice when they get to a certain point, when they start making a certain amount of money, whether to continue working and making more money or losing their benefits. So I'll let you go to the next slide and I'll get into that a little bit more. So what that looks like is this, and actually in pure corporate fashion, my slides build. So if you want to click a couple times and it'll fill out the rest on here. There we go. So what are benefits cliffs? So kind of as I described before, and as we get into it, sometimes benefits cliff can be really difficult to track and really qualify because there's so many variables at play. Single parent or dual family income, how many children do you have, your annual income, if you own your home, all of these variables, depending on the benefits program that you're eligible for, can play a role in determining what programs either you can be eligible for or how much money you'd then be eligible for as part of these programs. So where individuals are impacted on this benefits cliff changes based on those variables, but really the outcome is this, and it's represented in the graph that I have there. So in that graph, it shows in purple, that is Wisconsin shares, which is what we're focusing on here today. And what happens is that for an individual with 2 children in Milwaukee County, before you're making $40,000 a year, anything below that, you're eligible for about $27,000 in child care credits, right? Milwaukee County, the report came out today from Wisconsin Policy Forum, and it's about $12,000 to $13,000 a year that it costs for infant care in Milwaukee County, right? So that represents a totality of the ability for a working parent to be able to put their child in what is really a very expensive expense for a parent, which is the child care thing. But it's also very important because you want to give your children a safe, quality place to be cared for while the parent is at work. Once that parent is making $40,000.01, they're eligible for $0 in child care benefits. What that exemplifies then is the choice that 25,000 families, parents in Milwaukee County are faced with. Either I stay behind that cliff and I forego a promotion, I forego additional wages that I'm making at work, I forego a new job that can, as I said before, improve the outcomes of myself and my family and my ability to provide for my family, or I stay on these benefits. And really that is both from the lens of the outcomes for addressing inter and intergenerational poverty and improving the outcomes of communities, but then also the ability for those individuals to care for their families over time. So what you see with that drop off, if you extended that out through the lifetime of that individual, what they lose at $40,000, they don't regain until they get to about $90,000 in annual income. So if an individual in this position, that could represent 15 to 20 years of their career that they would really be operating at a deficit. So as it kind of shares here and goes a little deeper, I touched on a few of these points already. One of the major qualifiers for this in Wisconsin are what's called the federal poverty level. That was a ratio or a number that was put in place in the 1960s. So the qualifier today is once you're at 180% of the federal poverty level, really, which is in Wisconsin about 36 to 40,000, depending on some of the variables I touched on, 85% state median income, or there's a level of liquid assets, about $25,000 that you have before you're then determined to be ineligible for this. So hopefully for the attendees on the call, this visualizes well the problem, really. And so that problem, as we look at it in the past and what had worked, and I'll get into that in a few moments with some of these slides, really is that there's an impact to the individuals, there's impact to the businesses they're operating within, and really at the state level of these programs, the sustainability of these programs, there's impact there too. So I'll let you go to the next slide and I can get into that a little bit more. So as we began this work, really, the first thing we did was said, what's happened in the past that hasn't made this successful? Talked to a number of legislators and they really told us There have been great proposals in the past to come forward to address this issue. What they haven't had is industry partners at the table with them that have said, we need this. This is impacting our workforce. That is a front and center conversation that's happening right now. That issue is exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, really, and it's a clear workforce issue today. So how we looked at putting this together, and as Lori touched on with some of the Young American Leaders Program, a part of that playbook is what they call the Commons, which is how does nonprofits, business, education, really in government, how can they collaborate together, which is a similar approach to what we took here. So to the individual, the work we did with the Federal Reserve says that for an individual that stays behind that cliff, they forgo about $280,000 in lifetime earnings, right? So what does that mean? What's the opportunity cost there for individuals, especially vulnerable individuals, economically vulnerable individuals and their families? And then what does that mean for potential outcomes for our community and enriching our community? One of the other things we looked at is what does that mean? And I know Lori will get into this a little bit further on in our conversation, but this is not necessarily isolated to urban communities. Actually, what we found through this research is it's disproportionately rural, right? And the report that came out today from Wisconsin Policy Forum says that about 70% of people in the state live in what's considered a childcare desert, meaning there's just aren't options. So what's the opportunity cost there for the individual and the family? At the state level, those individuals who stay on these programs per capita cost the state lifetime about $400,000. So what does that then mean for the way these programs are designed and the sustainability of these programs long-term, that if given the option to transition off of these programs, where then could those dollars be reallocated to other areas of need for individuals across the state? So what's the opportunity cost for the state? And then lastly is industry, right? And again, in our approach, the goal here is how are we identifying stakeholders throughout this ecosystem that we can then bring in and address and work with? And last is industry. So in that same report that came out today from the Wisconsin Policy Forum, they said that it's about $1.9 billion in economic loss, economic opportunity cost for the state of Wisconsin every year because individuals are constrained in their ability to then scale up their employees. So if you're in a situation where that employee is staying behind the cliff, that means you're having to go outside the region to either get talent paying above market rate, or you're having to then poach from other industry players, right? So when we also looked, healthcare industry alone, cliffs impact about 40% of that workforce. Really for us, then it's how can we then position our analysis and research to then understand the impact across these sectors as we're looking to bring in concerned parties together and look at potential opportunities to address this. So I'll let you go to the next slide. This gives a little bit of context too of how we got here. So I know I've been talking to Lori about this for almost 4 years now as we were starting to put this opportunity together. And what we did is this. There's a lot of great work that's already been done in the state of Wisconsin. And that's where we started, right? Where were the proposed legislative changes that happened in the past? Why didn't those work? I touched on kind of our approach as we're looking at gathering stakeholders together of how we look to change that with the dialogue we wanted to create around those cross-sector opportunities. Then we worked across the state to understand emerging or established research that had been done. There's excellent research done at the La Follette School in Madison that had come out right around the time we started working on this. And then we also worked statewide to then whether it's through Department of Workforce Development, the WEDC from an economic lens, and then work to understand, is there really an opportunity to state level to address this issue, and is there buy-in now with the workforce crisis that we're in today? It really is right time, right place. Next, what we did was we convened experts across sectors, right? So as I said before, there's a lot of nonprofit work in Milwaukee. There's community advocates who work deeply in the space. Luckily, we were able to pull them on. And then through there, we worked with the Federal Reserve. What we found is that what I looked at in previous slide, it seems straightforward, a straightforward piece to put together, but the ability to tie the impact to the individual state programs, what that means for tax bases, of if these individuals are able to move off of the cliff and continue in their workforce, or their ability to then progress in their career, what does that mean? Or then the economics with industry. Really, the Federal Reserve was the organization best positioned to articulate the opportunities there. And so a couple of years ago, we were able to begin working with them. There's expertise in the Atlanta branch specifically They provide us substantial analysis, and they're working with us on a policy brief that'll be coming out in the next few months, really to help us understand what is the opportunity cost, how do we quantify that, how do we qualify that with real stories from individuals who are impacted across the state, and then how do we package that in a way that's compelling to get both coalition partners, industry partners on board, as well as the attention of legislators in a way that we can boil this issue down, make it real, but then also be able to articulate the opportunity moving forward. And that's really where we're at today. So today we're working with a group of legislators in Madison. And so there's tremendous interest there right now. I think, as I said before, there was bipartisan legislation. There's been Democrat-led and Republican-led legislation in the past. It just hasn't been able to make it across the finish line. And as I kind of alluded to, that now with the current workforce crunch we're in, as well as some of the other amazing work that other groups are doing in the state of Wisconsin around childcare and funding childcare, that it's front and center. So it is the time, if we're going to address this, to do it now. I believe that's the end of my slides. So you don't have to hear me talk anymore.
Well, don't worry, you're not done yet, Graham, because obviously there's a lot to unpack and dig into there. So thank you so much for giving us kind of that deeper dive into what the benefits cliff is and how it affects individuals. I want to shift to Chris for just a minute as well. So introduce Chris at the front of the call, who's I'm gonna pull up your title here again, CEO, President and CEO of the Wisconsin Restaurant Association again. So Chris, you had some great examples, very tangible examples of how this affects your members. I'm wondering if you can kind of bring this to life for us and tell us from an individual's perspective, how is this affecting them?
Well, thank you for having me today. I did want to start with the fact that this is such a critically important conversation that we are having right now, and highlighting this, that it impacts so many people. I know Tempo, Milwaukee is where we are, but this is really impacting the entire state from our perspective, our members, businesses, as well as nationally. So this is a conversation that's happening everywhere, and bringing folks together really is critically important, because this is something that we need to solve. And for restaurants, there's nothing more valuable to them than their employees. Coming out of COVID, trying to figure out how to reopen, how to recoup, how to serve their customers in a way that also serves the needs of their employees is something they're tackling every single day. We've got higher supply prices. We've got debt that they've taken on with a lot of the COVID relief. You've got a lot of things going on. And then layer on top of that, workforce issues and the difficulty of finding staff, as well as those that they are finding, the wages continue to increase. And so that benefit cliffs become so important, because as their wages increase, they can work fewer hours in order to not hit that cliff. We've got many that are turning down raises, who are not taking promotions, who are very limited on what they can do at a time when employers are really wanting them to be able to work more, to give them promotions and really give them a lot of opportunities. So it really has become a brick wall for a lot of folks. So I've got a couple of tangible examples to give you to really illustrate the impact of this. And again, this is not just a Milwaukee issue. This is an issue across the state as well as across the country. I know of a specific example. We had an operator who had a great assistant manager, and they really wanted to elevate her into a general manager positions. And she really had the opportunity to ultimately own her own franchise. The cliff for her was that she said, I have to turn this promotion down, because for this little bit more money, I'm going to lose $5,000 worth of childcare benefits. Now, in this particular case, she was valued, and this was a little bit of a larger employee, so they had the ability to overcome that barrier and pay her those additional dollars so she didn't lose it. And she then was able to move on in her career, which is amazing. But we have another example. In fact, this is a childcare worker of a colleague of mine. Her daughter was offered $1 more an hour in her job as a childcare worker. That meant that she lost $4,500 worth of childcare benefits herself, And in childcare, where any additional money spent is passed on to parents, and we know how expensive that is, it really becomes problematic. And she had to turn that down or lose that. And that was so important as a single mom. She did not have a significant other to really pick up those pieces for her. And then you have the additional element of, if you are looking at your staff holistically, well, if you pay one person more and a little bit more and a little bit more, what about wage compression on the rest of your staff? And in this case, that those costs are passed on to the parents of the children. Or if you're talking in a restaurant, it's not just one person, it's multiple people. That's passed on to the consumers. And remember that restaurants, by and large, are disposable income opportunities. So not everybody, I mean, there are some instances where restaurants really fill in a meal gap for a lot of families. But for the most part, most restaurants are something that is disposable income, that you go out fewer times, or you purchase something that maybe you would have had a steak and now you're ordering chicken instead. So there are some choices being made here, and that impacts businesses. And many of our restaurants are small businesses that really don't have a lot of wiggle room. Backing up just a second, pre-COVID, the profit margin on most restaurants, and this is the big picture, it's not every single individual one, is that the profit margin on most restaurants was between 3 and 5%. And putting that in real dollar terms, that means for every dollar that came into the restaurant, 95 to 97 cents of it was already spoken for in terms of overhead, staffing costs, rent, gas, any expense in a restaurant. So pre-COVID, that was a 3 to 5 cent on every dollar. That was profit margin. At post-COVID, that has shrunk even further because of supply prices, employee and staffing wage prices, as well as the ability that restaurants don't have to be open as many meal services that they were pre-COVID, and the hours that they were, and so on. So they have a less of an opportunity to make up that difference. So this is a very complex issue, and we have been talking about benefit cliffs for many, many years. Graham, thank you for bringing this to the forefront, because it's something that we need to continue to have this dialogue on, and it's in the association world, but it's also industry and it's business, as well as our nonprofit partners that really need to come together with our legislators to really find some practical solutions, because just paying people more money really isn't the only solution, because that's not viable, especially for small business owners.
Well, I think that's a great point, Chris. And in fact, it sounds like in this instance, there's a gap where paying people more money is actually a disincentive to them, right? So
Yeah.
obviously there's something fundamentally wrong with the system there. So a couple of things that you just mentioned that I want to unpack a little bit here. We talked about this not just being a problem in Milwaukee, but statewide, but we also mentioned nationally. Graham, based on your research, does every state struggle with this issue like Wisconsin, or have other states solved this? Are we unique? What have you found there?
Definitely not unique. So to your point, within these programs, there's federal qualifiers, and then there's state qualifiers within them. So states have sometimes limited flexibility with how these benefits programs are designed on the back end. And so some states, I think it also comes down to the states that have made it a priority. I think right now, Wisconsin's in a position where industry is very much making this front and center and making it a priority, both from a workforce perspective, but then also from just the economics of childcare overall. And so there's some, so Minnesota, Utah jumps out to me, Virginia. States have all done it on their own. I know Mississippi and Florida have done similar to what we're proposing of, are there opportunities for that cliff to then either extend it out or then provide step down credits for individuals so that they're gradually transitioning off. Chris brought up the $4,500. So how do we mitigate that and lessen the impact? So we're improving the ability of that individual to make a choice between saying, I'm either going to take this promotion and make more money so I can better provide for my family, or I have to lose all of the support that I'm getting for providing safe childcare for my child. So those states are ones that jump out at me. Florida specifically and Mississippi did very similar to what we're looking to do. Really what it comes down to is engaging legislators in a way to bring attention to the issue, but then also articulating in a way where the Federal Reserve has really helped us with the analysis to make it in real terms, understand what the impact is at the state level so that they make it a priority.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. My next question reflects something that Maggie just dropped into the chat as well, but you also mentioned that there's been a lot of good work done in this area. Chris has mentioned as well that benefits, this is not a new concept, right? We've been talking about this for a long time, but there are a few things that are making this effort different than in the past, including cross-sector collaboration and wide industry support. So tell us more about that and how you went about building it.
On my side, it was definitely a learning process. I think what it took was just knocking on doors and beginning to talk to people and learning through those conversations how widespread this issue is, really. And that then kind of that's where the work with the Federal Reserve has been really helpful to then put it in terms of that potential partner. I think one of the things I found leading into this, what we learned from as legislators really is that the law of the instruments at play, and if anyone's familiar with the law of the instrument, it's that to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So typically within those sectors, they have a very sector-specific approach to address the issue, right? So legislators want to legislate, business people want to, right, spin off new business programs, nonprofits create programs to try to address things. It's been understanding the needs of all these cross-sector partners and really doing that through ongoing relationship building and listening, working with them to understand that then how do we articulate or position this opportunity in terms that resonate or meet their needs. And that's been the critical component, I think, of working across sectors and then understanding what role they can play, right? And so that's been, like I mentioned, community advocates as one of our partner in the Milwaukee area. Really what that's also helped us to do is build out the coalition with trust across those sectors because of the way that we're approaching it, which has made all those pieces a lot easier, I'd say.
Well, and then I want to kind of flip that around, Chris, and get your perspective on that as well. So I sort of alluded to this at the beginning, but one of the things that's so unique about this particular project and Graham's work on the benefits cliff is oftentimes it's groups more like yours, Chris, that are initiating maybe legislative proposals or, a group that works regularly with a lobbyist. And what's really unique here is Graham, as a citizen, again, saw a need, saw good work that had been advanced, but not yet completed or brought to fruition. So sort of picked it up and continued to move it forward. So it's been very grassroots in many ways in terms of that coalition building and that partnership. But from your perspective, Chris, what is compelling to you in order to partner on an effort like this? What do you look for when someone comes to you to approach from a partnership perspective and says, get on board? Just in case anyone else on the call is thinking about maybe their benefits cliff and moving it forward.
Well, what's really predicating all of this is just the lack of people to work in a lot of jobs. And there are a lot of folks that are, say, on unemployment or on the sidelines and so on, but there's a mismatch a lot of times between those that are, quote, on the sidelines. And I put that in air quotes because I don't think it's fair that we say that so many people are just sitting at home and not doing anything. Well, there's a mismatch between that and what's needed in a lot of jobs. Mm-hmm. And so there's training issues going on here. But what's exciting to see, though, is now we as an association, and I am a lobbyist and I talk to legislators all the time, and it's a huge education piece that we're trying to help them understand why this is so important and what the issues are, and then the grassroots of what Graham is doing. And now, because of the workforce shortage and the workforce issues, now it's starting to come together, and that's what's exciting. So it's no longer working in this way and working in this way. It's now starting to come together where we can all partner to really make a big difference, because in the end, this is for our valued employees, and this is for those kids that need childcare. And it's more than childcare. We're also talking Badger care, and that's health care. So it's more than just that one piece. It's very layered and and it's very complex. The other thing that I just wanted to point out too is that, especially now with post-COVID, there's a heightened awareness to working remotely and hybrid working and flexibility and meeting employees where they are, rather than just the employer saying, hey, we need you to work 9 to 5. This is when you're going to be, you're coming in and so on. Whereas now, because of the workforce shortage, they have to meet employees where they are. So they're adding some flexibilities that maybe instead of working 9 to 5, maybe they work 7 to 3. And maybe if they have a significant other, they work a little bit later so they can help bridge that childcare gap in this instance. So there's a lot of flexibility that a lot of employers are able to do, and recognizing the importance and the need for it. And pre-COVID, that wasn't necessarily happening. And this issue isn't going away. We know in Wisconsin, we have a demographic problem. And what I mean by that is our demographic growth is not meeting the needs of job growth and what we need in our market. We also are a cold climate, so we lose a lot of our folks to warmer climate states. We also know that we've got a brain drain. So some of our great kids that are coming out of college, they're leaving the state. Or we've got other states that have a better tax climate. So we have a problem with population growth, as well as attracting talent into our state or keeping talent in our state. And that's a big part of this. If we could solve part of that, we could solve part of this other issue of a workforce shortage and so on. So I think that there is never a better time than we are right now in this space to really have meaningful conversations and push for meaningful change, because it really is so important. Because whether you're a restaurant owner, whether you're a childcare, or whether you're in manufacturing, this is something that matters to you. And if you're not paying attention to these benefit cliff issues, you're behind the 8 ball already.
Mm-hmm. I think your response to that, Chris, just sort of demonstrates really how complex this whole issue is, right? There are many different facets to it. And as Graham mentioned, right now, his focus for the benefits cliff is really around the childcare credits, right? But there's so many more complexities to it. And it's probably a long-term fix over a period of time.
Absolutely.
So digging in just a little bit on that childcare issue, knowing that this is really where this benefits piece is focusing. There's been a lot of news lately. I know I just saw a study today from the Wisconsin Policy Forum about childcare deserts, right? The availability and cost of childcare. And anyone on this call today who is a parent feels that and knows how much specifically they pay, how hard it is to get a spot into a childcare, especially one that you feel like really great about sending your kid to. So talk to us, Graham, about your proposal today, and which again provides additional support for people to receive those childcare services. And then talk to us about how that shapes up with the reports that we're hearing that childcare availability, is a real struggle.
Right.
How do we reconcile those issues and propose solutions for both of them moving forward?
Yeah, I think, and Chris hit on a really important point earlier, that this is a very multifaceted issue. We're approaching it from one piece, right? But there are a lot of interconnected moving pieces. And so, Laura, you brought up a really good point, which is, there is tremendous work happening right now in Madison to try to address the fiscal cliff around the economics of childcare, right? So the American Rescue Plan Act helped with federal funds to then alleviate some of the overhead cost or the operating costs of childcare centers to help them stay open and pay their staff. And so that's part of that proposal. And I think it's also part of the focus. I know the Wisconsin Policy Forum paper and some of the proposals in Madison right now, part of the upcoming budget is, how do we continue investing in this space? Because it is so critical for early childhood education and the outcomes of our communities to invest in early childhood and in the care of our children. What we're looking at is more of the systemic issues with how these benefits programs are designed. So within them, right? And so this is an issue that existed before the fiscal cliff we're facing right now, and it's going to continue to exist even if the fiscal cliff is addressed, which is the inner workings and qualifiers to determine eligibility for these programs, right? That really for us is It's an and, it's not an or. I see them as both complementary and interconnected. And so that's where, as we saw and understood, there are others already working in the space in terms of the availability and access. Our opportunity, we saw it as, how do we begin? I think how I think about it, because Chris, you also brought up Badger Care, which is another, that is actually the biggest cliff in the state. The second largest is childcare. What we looked at is, we said, how do we begin a robust dialogue around the opportunity to tweak these programs and the way that they're designed to provide more flexibility and longer access for individuals as they're participating in these programs, as their wages increase, right? So that's kind of how I see them, as separate but interconnected, if that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sure does. So I just want to remind people, if you have questions, again, this is complex stuff, but if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. One point that I just want, it didn't occur to me until you told your story about this, Chris, but childcare workers are in such an interesting position right now, because again, they are such a valuable resource right now, and they themselves are being affected by the benefits cliff. So they're kind of in a really interesting spot.
Mm-hmm. I also want to share with folks that, one of the things that we learned, and I was at a workforce development conference about a year ago, is during COVID, Milwaukee lost 91 daycares. And so, as difficult as daycares were to find and afford, when you lose a lot of them during COVID because they couldn't afford to keep their doors open, we're starting off at a deficit of just slots for people to be in. And of course, we also want fantastic training for these daycare workers, because they're caring for our most precious resource. They're caring for our children and our grandchildren. And so you just don't want to place it anywhere just because there's an opening. You want a quality. And believe it or not, what many people don't realize is my original vocation was early childhood education. I was a preschool and kindergarten teacher. And I went on to do other professional things. But there is training and expertise, and this is a profession. It's not just put warm bodies in there to take care of your children. You want people who understand child development and how they can help these young minds grow and evolve and be safe, but also be vibrant and thrive. And so it's not just a matter of slots. We need training for these childcare workers, and we need some of our best and brightest to be our teachers, not only at the elementary, but also at the early childhood level. So it's not just slots. We also need to build the capacity for teachers in this area. And we know there's a teacher shortage macro, even in elementary and middle school and high school, but we have to add early childhood education into that mix.
Mm-hmm. For those in Madison who may think that maybe this is just a Milwaukee issue or an urban issue, can you both give us a sense of, and Chris, I don't know if you know the numbers, but can you give us a sense of how many people, Chris, within your industry, and Graham from your research statewide, how many people in what areas this currently affects the most that will benefit from a change to this current structure?
I think it's everywhere. You've got areas, it doesn't matter if it's in Milwaukee or if it's in Altoona or La Crosse, you have childcare deserts, that you have families that cannot find care, and much less quality care, be able to afford it. And that is a macro problem, and it is across the board. It's everywhere, but it really particularly hits our our lower socioeconomic strata, because they have limited options. If you are in a higher income person, you can afford higher care, you can have transportation, excuse me, to get your children there, but that's not the case with everybody. I can't even begin to guess how many people, the tens of thousands of families that this affects, and it's everywhere. It's not limited to Milwaukee, and it's not limited to urban areas, it's rural as well.
I would echo that. I would say our research around cliffs, the best way to explain it, Laura, I think in rural communities, they suffer from what we call the economics of choice. So when you're in urban communities, you have greater access to, even to Chris's point, we've lost a lot, but, I think that's where we get to the Wisconsin Policy Forum paper that came out this morning. The number that jumped out at me is that 70% of people in rural communities across the state are living essentially in childcare deserts, meaning that maybe they have one or two options within their area. What we also know is that based on how these programs are structured and the federal poverty level qualifier, that an individual in Chippewa County hits that cliff at about 100% federal poverty level, but in Milwaukee County, it's closer to 250 to 300% of the federal poverty level, they hit that cliff. So we know that individuals in rural communities are impacted sooner and more significantly than people in urban communities. But to Chris's point, I mean, it doesn't mean that that it's just a rural issue. It's a statewide issue, right? And it really, to Chris's point, impacts the economically vulnerable to the highest degree.
Great, thank you. So one quick question from the chat that Ian dropped in earlier, I think, Graham, that just kind of illustrates, I mean, I cannot imagine how much you have learned during this process, both of you. I mean, Chris, yours is on the job training, right, as you go through, but Graham, I know some of this is completely unrelated to your day job. So where did you get all of this data from? And what kind of put you on the path to exploring the benefits cliff and how to start solving it?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, a lot of it, the Greater Milwaukee Committee had started this work, and so tremendously supportive from the Greater Milwaukee Committee with the resources and connections. A lot of our research to date has come either out of the La Follette School in Madison or with our partnership with the Federal Reserve in Atlanta, Chicago, as well as the Bureau of Economic Research in Washington, D.C. So that's where the bulk of our analysis comes from. The second part of the question, when I started this work, I had one child in daycare, right? And I invited my wife to be on the call today, and I saw her name, so I know she's here. And there was a period of time that we were writing eye-watering checks, right, for our children's childcare on a monthly basis. And then as we started looking at that, even me and all that I have to be thankful for of just the impact that has cost overhead for a family, right, that is economically vulnerable and the choices they have to make. I think that's been one of the biggest drivers for me, is not just in my curiosity and learning, but then also the opportunity, Lori, you said, to identify an issue, the opportunity and the ability to solve it, but also on the human side, the real stories of people that are impacted being forced, like 25,000 families in Milwaukee County are being forced with this choice right now. Right. And so the ability to do something about that and be part of the solution has been a big driving factor for me.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, we're getting close to wrap up time here as well. So we're just keeping an eye on the chat. But if I could kind of have both of you, Chris and Graham, last word, kind of quick hit. What's either one thing that you've learned from this process that you want to share, or one ask that you'd like to make of the people on the call that could support you in the work that you're doing right now to help solve this issue?
I guess the biggest eye-opening thing to me is really the conversations that need to be had, the education that this isn't a me versus you problem. This is a we problem. And the conversations and the critical nature of having these conversations and educating our legislators as well as our business owners on why this is important and why they need to be part of the solutions. It's not somebody else's problem, it's our problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, the biggest learning I've probably taken away from this, you start alone and you begin just having conversations, learning more and more. What I've learned through this is just the willingness and openness of partners that you can create in these relationships you can build that build that momentum or inertia to help get things done, right? And that's the biggest thing I've learned is don't stop, don't give up, just keep going, keep moving forward. It's a slow process. I've been working at this for 4 years now. But I think that's also been the most rewarding piece is just people by and large want to do good. and want to be part of a solution, and if you give them the opportunity to do that. And I think from my learning with, doing the analysis and homework beforehand so that you go into those conversations, that whether it's been the Federal Reserve or Department of Children and Families, whether it's been the legislators that we worked with, right, or partnerships that we've been able to build, as well as being able to tap into the network of the people on this call, right, and other people in Milwaukee, that people want to help be part of a solution. And if you give them the opportunity to do that, I think that's where, requires the leadership and the follow through to get those pieces done, that you'd be shocked at the doors that open for you. And so I think that's also, Lori, the other part of any ask. We are now in a critical juncture of trying to get this legislation across the finish line in Madison, really. And I haven't gone into specifics on purpose of the legislation because it's not officially drafted, but a lot of the things I talked about today will be included in that proposal. And so if there's anyone on the phone today who either is interested in joining and being part of this solution, or know others in their industry or sector who are stakeholders that would be a part of this too, please send them in my direction, because that coalition is critical from the feedback we heard from legislators of getting this across the finish line, of making sure that those interested parties and affected parties are part of the dialogue, so that when legislators are saying, this is great, who's asking for it, that we have that interested group coalition together. So please send them my way. Love to talk to them.
What's really exciting about conversations like we're having today is that we're shining a bright light on this issue, so that there are business owners who feel like they don't know how to help their employees, that we've got families who feel like they're isolated and they don't know what to do. But by shining a light and bringing this to the forefront, that this is a holistic issue that we need to solve with a holistic solution, that helps us drive that conversation and helps educate and elevate this as an issue to our state legislators. If they just hear from one or two people, they are not going to think that this is important. They're hearing it from industry, they're hearing it from associations. We're all hearing it today. The more we talk to them on how important this is, the more they are likely to advocate for change and pass legislation.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Again, very complex issue today. Not a lot of time to kind of boil it down, but I think you did a phenomenal job just giving those who tuned in today some insight into, again, how you take a really complex issue and start solving a piece of it, right? Because that is part of the solution. We can't always, boil the ocean, but you can drive change one small piece at a time. So thank you, Graham and Chris. And Jen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I echo your comments, Lori, and thank you for moderating today's discussion. Graham, thank you for bringing this to our network of Tempo and emerging women leaders. And Chris, thanks for your insights from the Restaurant Association. So very appreciative of an incredibly important topic. I think a call to action. We've talked a lot about collective impact, the importance of partnerships and getting this out. But we as Tempo members and emerging women leaders, it's our ability and our responsibility now to take this knowledge and take this education and inform others, right? And continue to make sure that we're cascading this message beyond just our those on the call today. So thank you again. Just a few updated invites and events that we have coming up, just to keep them on your calendars. Women's Affinity Alliance is our next session on Wednesday, May 31st, our ERG's best practices. So we encourage you all to register for that. It's a really great discussion from our 28 corporate sponsors on sharing best practices of your employee resource groups. Our Tempo Real Talk, so these are conversations that have really sparked around our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, will take place on June 1st, so stay tuned for that. And then our June Past Presidents Program meeting will be in person at the Italian Community Center on June 22nd. And beyond all of that programming, we really are a fun bunch. So we ask that you come out and join us at our golf outing, both golfers, like really great golfers and non-golfers, are all encouraged to come out and play 9 holes of golf for our outing and summer social on June 26th. So hope that you can join us. Guests are welcome. So all of our Honies that are with us on today's call, get your foursome together and join us for this really incredible event. Thank you again to our incredible panelists, Graham and Christine, as well as Lori, for moderating today's Tempo Talk session. Thank you and have a wonderful Friday. We will see you back here shortly. Thanks.